Hello and welcome to this Euractiv Thought Leadership interview. I'm Anna Gumbau, and today we're going to be discussing the European single market, competitiveness, sustainable products, product labeling, the European Green Deal, and what's coming up now with the European Parliament elections around the corner. We are broadcasting from Metro's store in Gundelfingen in Germany, and joining me today I have two guests with me. Starting with a member of the European Parliament, Andreas Schwab. He's a member of the European Parliament from Germany, from the Christian Democratic Union as part of the European People's Party. Welcome, Mr. Schwab. And also joining us is Vice President for Global Own Brands at Metro, Jens Bresler. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
I would like to start with this interview with a little reflection on what has been achieved in the past term at the European Parliament and in terms of European Union policies. And I would like to start with you, Mr. Schwab. What would you highlight that has been the biggest achievements that the European Parliament has achieved in terms of advancing the sustainable transition for businesses and for consumers? What can you tell us about that?
Well, if you take a look into market and all the different products, there can be no doubt that the shift that we did in a lot of areas from directives to regulations, so from rules that had to be implemented at national level to European laws that are directly implemented, that they play a very big role. You can relate it to toys, you can relate it to general safety of products. And that is a very important step for companies that have a European business footprint. And on the sustainability of the products in a lot of areas, be it in fisheries, be it in labeling, we have also made steps to make sure that consumers can better see from where they shop.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Bresler, Metro then and its products have been affected and are going to be affected with all this regulation that has been agreed in this past legislative term. So when we talk about Metro's own brands, what can you tell us about its sustainability transition and how is it going to be like to be implementing all these directives and all these regulations that have come up from this past regulatory term?
Yeah, first of all, I have to say we are extremely proud of our own brand. So that's something also in our long-term strategy which plays a fundamental role. It's a huge pillar in our business development. So we are really counting on the development of own brands, and that is something then different. Our own brand business versus the branded articles, because that is something we are in charge of the full process, the full value chain from A to Z. That goes along with a certain responsibility, especially since we are one of the major players in Europe, being present in 16 European countries. And that is kind of, there are pros and cons related to that. Of course, we support any kind of initiative which gives an added value for our customers. But there are also things which have a kind of a more bureaucratic terms, and that is something where we're also facing burdens. In the end, we would like to sell our own brand products as much as we can, and where it makes sense, of course, that we are bundling volumes, that it makes sense. So that is something we are working hard on, and that is something then, of course, as Mr. Schwab said, directives and different regulations always need to be checked, need to be understood how to implement that, what kind of consequences are related to that, which resources do you need, how to do things. Some things are relatively easy to be implemented, some things are a bit more complicated to be implemented.
Mm-hmm. Let's zoom in into the question of the European single market. For an international business present in 16 European countries like Metro, this is of utmost importance. And at the end of the day, this is one of the crown jewels of European integration. So how would you assess the current state of the European single market? Is it achieving its initial purpose of cross-border trade and consumer transport? What can you tell us about that, Mr. Schwab? Some first reflections?
Well, that's a very good question, but normal people, they don't understand the single market, because what's that? It's very difficult. And you have to say it's all the rules that govern this space here, everything. It's the rules on packaging for products that come into the European Union. We made a new law. It's the rules on labeling, it's the rules on content, it's everything. And so the more of this interaction you create as a complexity, and unfortunately, with laws coming from the area of the environment, with laws coming from the area of fisheries, with laws coming from the area of deforestation and all that stuff, you create if I may say so, a bit of a mess that lead exactly to that strategy that Metro has just outlined. For them, it's safer and cheaper to do everything on their own, under their own control. But this is not always the best way to keep the European single market open for small and medium-sized businesses. But if we go for more and more regulation and more obligations, reporting and whatever, the companies will say, listen, we cannot oversee that with 200 suppliers. We prefer to integrate the process in our own hands, then we control it. It's burdensome, but at least we can manage it. And that's always a balance that we have to strike in Europe. Isn't it better to go for less regulation, for less obligations, even if then there are some little loopholes, but we keep the market open for new and small, medium-sized companies? Or should we go further down that line of centralization that we don't want, but that is somehow the result of the complexity and the not perfectly managed interaction between all the regulations and obligations that we have been creating. And that's a bit the single market. It's all the rules that govern a specific sector, and it's very nice to see it here in the market because there is a lot of rules to be followed.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Mr. Bresler? What would you like to add?
I'm a big fan of the single market, so we are also benefiting from that. I think the original idea is fantastic, so I think there is no doubt about this. Then in the past years, I mean, it's been a lot, maybe too much in here and there in terms of regulations, so that is something where we have an eye on. We support, of course, any kind of initiative which kind of makes sense, but as Mr. Schwab says, for instance, for packaging regulations, in the end, we would like to simplify and streamline processes, and for us it's a huge difference if we have a product which we can sell in the end, and that's kind of our origin, and that is what we want to do, like buying and selling in the end. That's all what it comes down, although we are speaking about 10,000 of products. But we would like to, of course, then if we have one product with harmonized regulations, which we can sell across Europe, and even we are also outside of Europe present, that would be, of course, much easier. Because the increasing complexity by printing different lines of packaging, different stock management, different information, different requirements, different reporting duties. This is on, as I just said before, like for 10,000 of articles means a lot. And this is for us as a big company something, but as you also mentioned, small and medium-sized enterprises, for them minimum the same or even worse in some cases. So that is something where we would like together to fight a bit the complexity, and that we can even benefit and continue to benefit from that single market, which is a fantastic idea, and I think we're all happy to have it, and that's something we need to also in the upcoming years need to protect and even do fine-tuning maybe here and there.
Because it's not only the implementation of the many European directives and regulations, but also the fact that my understanding is that also many member states have their own sort of labeling requirements or specific labels, isn't it? Could you maybe illustrate some specific examples or that come to mind that illustrate these obstacles?
Yeah, indeed, you mentioned a valid point. In the end, it's kind of two cups of tea. One thing is, okay, if there's kind of a directive or regulation, it's one thing to discuss, okay, is that the best thing for us is if things are being harmonized. And this is then maybe more important for us than the directive itself. And that is something whenever we have a directive and national states have different ways of implementing things. And it might be, let's say, looks the detail on paper, but for instance, as you asked for a specific example, if we have like different sorting instruction icons on the packaging, so if different member states have different regulations which we need to follow, there is a certain complexity which might force us to have really country individual products and packaging related to that. Or another good example is for the deposit return system, where we have different approaches in different countries. In Germany, for instance, we have since, I don't know when exactly, but since a couple of years, a standardized approach. Now other countries are implementing different ways of doing so. So that has certain consequences in this full value chain from a producer until product being ready on shelf. So that is something where we are a bit concerned about developments like this, because then this idea of the single market in Europe is a bit diluted. with these different implementation rules on national level.
And Mr. Schwab, what is something that you might feel that the European Parliament could have been done to bridge these gaps, but something that could have been done better, or that you didn't manage to maybe conclude? What can you share?
I would say there are two sort of problems. One problem is the missing interaction or the missing organization and coordination of the interaction between different rules that might be justified, both of them. For example, packaging. There is no doubt that we should try to avoid packaging, that we should reduce plastics. But for some products, a company like Metro or any other company that is producing grocery has to strike a balance. What is more important, hygiene rules that the European Union has been done, or packaging avoidance? And the decision is a complicated decision. And you cannot say that plastics all the time is wrong. It can be the cheapest and the most sustainable solution for hygiene demands for specific products. And this interaction that has to be brought down for each cucumber, for each coffee, that is a decision that we have to leave to the specialists. We cannot make it out of the European Commission, a functionary saying we do it like that. They don't know the details. And the details will be different for cucumbers compared to ananas, and from ananas to something else. So this is a first point. But then there is a second element, and this is the question how we make sure that the European idea is really brought to essence. And the essence of Europe is that you have the variety from 27 member states with all the regional products, and that you can get there all over the place. So if you are here in Freiburg, you can shop what you want to have from France, from Spain, from Italy, but also from the region. But this works only very well if you have rules that are the same. Because if you can only shop here German cucumbers, but not the French ones, because they have a different labeling system which is not allowed in Germany, it doesn't matter. And then we lose the idea of Europe, because then we cannot take stock of this whole variety. So what we have to fight for, more than in the past, is that the labeling schemes are unique all over Europe, that not every country chooses its own. And with the Nutri-Score, as one example, for dietary informations, we have an example that some countries are pushing like crazy and others are rejecting. And such systems don't work, because we need European-wide solutions, because when you are on holidays in Italy, you want to have exactly the same information compared to your time of work in Brussels or here in the market. You want to understand the products all over the place in the same logics.
Which brings me to the next question, because we've been discussing about the impact on large but also smaller business and SMEs, but what would then the benefits of more harmonization in areas like product labeling bring to consumers in practice?
Well, I mean, let's imagine you are a producer of a specific grocery one product. If you are an SME, you're starting to sell this product in the region where you are located. But the more successful you are, the more you want to explore it and export it. And if you then have to restart new rules, because in Germany there are different rules than in France there are different rules than in Italy, then you lose a lot of the dynamism that you could have for your product. And that's not what we want to have in Europe. We want not to have a French producer for French markets. We want to have a good French producer for the whole European market, because that will make his success much bigger. And that is a point where member states, we have seen it with the olive oil, for example, have a tendency to say, no, we have to do it in our way because this is still better than the European way, and it's wrong. For big companies, it's okay, but for the smaller companies, it's destructive. But it comes back every 5 years, and it's really a pain, and I'm trying to fight against that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Bresler, what would you like to add?
Yeah, as Mr. Schwab says, the free flow of goods is very important within Europe, and you had good examples with the olive oil, or if it's the mozzarella from Italy, or the jamon serrano from Spain. It's all about having this, and we all enjoy that, these different cuisines and different kind of restaurants. You want to explore that diversity in food culture everywhere, and that is very important that we keep on going in such a direction. And the food business itself, and we are mainly a food player, of course, also having a non-food as well, is a complex topic. And again, 10,000 of product means a lot, as you can see in front of us. And that is especially for our professional customers so important, that they have really high quality, high value products available. And that goes along a lot with different tastes, different cuisines which you would like to explore. Yeah, and that we would like to make available to our customers as good as we can. And that is especially with our own brand what we would like to underline, because we believe we have something valuable to give to our customers with our own brand ranges, because in the end they are developed from professionals for professional customers, which is a very important one, especially for the restaurant business, which are our main customers.
And talking about the question of the European single market, this has been the talk of town back in Brussels, especially quite
Really?
recently with the...
I think far too less. We should discuss much more about that.
Then how do you think that the report that was requested by the European Commission President, that former Italian Prime Minister Enrico Letta made on the state of the European single market, what do you make out of this conclusions of the report, and do you think that it's going to advance any big changes in the European political agenda in the future?
Well, you said that there is the hot topic in town. I have to admit to you that I fear, I don't know, but I fear that it's not at all a hot topic. It's one of the topics that comes back every 5 years. It's the report for the European Council. The European Commission has asked Draghi to make another report. And I think there are very good ideas in it. Some of them I was also able to defend myself with Mr. Letta. But the question will be now, what political strength has the Council, the 27 member states, to defend the ideas that are inside there? Because to a certain extent, the Council has to overcome its own resistances. The French Minister for Agriculture will say this doesn't work, the Spanish Minister will say that doesn't work, the German Minister will say this doesn't work at all, and like that we are very often blocked. But that's more for sectoral issues. So we need to overcome these internal divergences to have really the idea again that the best for the European single market is one rule for everyone, because like that all over Europe the best product can really grow European-wide and not only within its own borders. But what in that report is a bit underestimated is that complexity of interaction of different sectorial legislations. The example with hygiene and packaging is, I think, very good. For some products, we cannot know how you make them brought over the European territory.
Sometimes it makes me wonder, indeed, if different parliament committees really talk to each other and to really bring this together and to bridge this possible gaps. But maybe, Mr. Bresler, something that I wanted to ask is around also the state and also the fate of the European Green Deal, because one of the ideas that the Letta report mentions is the fact that we need to build a sustainable single market for all. In terms of improving the economic integration, but also making the green transition and sustainability to the core of the European single market. So I'm wondering, after these 5 years of legislation, we've had the European climate law, Fit for 55 package, all different pieces of legislation, farm to fork strategy, you name it. To which extent do you think that it's going to be effective in practice in driving sustainability for businesses such as Metro?
I think it's a very good example of something which started with good intentions, and we will always support the topic of sustainability. It plays a major role in everything what we do, especially when it's about product being the main, kind of, for instance, if we take CO2 emissions, of course the product part is the most relevant part. In the end, I think we are talking, if I'm not mistaken, about more than 160 different kind of reporting duties which we would need to fulfill. So that is again something which started well, and then we create a complexity which we have to manage. And that is something I would welcome to have that kind of more reality check. And I think it's important that exactly what we do maybe also today, to have a bit of this sharing between the political world, let's say, and the business world, because in the end, of course, there's people who are not every day having to work with products and being in the wholesale store. It's something different, and there is something where we need to have this reality check between the theory and the practical implications. And that is something I think also for the Green Deal, as you mentioned, that one which would always be good to have that closer exchange, even that we can learn from each other, because I'm sure there are different things which we can we can explore on both sides. So that is something always having in mind, okay, good intention, but then we need to make it later on manageable, executable, and not to have too much bureaucratic burden, I would say. Yeah.
But you know, this is a very good point, because for this emission, for example, but the same for the political debate, if you try to unravel this complexity, it gets totally complicated. It's not sexy. It's totally boring if you have to explain the hygiene demands, the packaging demands, the business demands, the consumer demands, and you get lost. It's much more political interesting for you if someone sits on the canapé and says, we have to ban all this. That's very easy. Everyone understands it. You can make a good report. But if you say, no, don't ban it, it's so complex, we can ban a bit, but we have to allow a bit, and we have to leave the liberty and the flexibility. No one wants to go for this look on the complexity of the interaction. And that's what's missing to a certain extent. It's also due to the fact that politics is much easier in social media if you are one-sided. But it's also a way that the European Commission in the last 5 years in the area of the Green Deal has been a bit short-term driven. And what we have to manage is a long-term view for the European consumer, like you and me, going in the market, and you may like to look for feta from Cyprus or from Greece, you may look for olive oil from Spain or from, and you want to explore the whole variety of Europe. And you want that the European law is allowing for that and giving you the privilege to choose yourself and not decide for you with stupid labeling requirements that make it impossible for some products to be on the market.
I couldn't agree more on this, so thank you for that. And exactly this passion also, it's great to see that we have that also. We should have that even more in the daily political discussion, let's say, to bring things forward in that direction. Yes.
But for instance, when it comes to the question of flexibility and whether we need more or less regulation, I mean, it's inevitable that to some extent that we need this framework, that even when we talk about investor certainty, having a solid regulatory framework that's required. And I mean, if we look, for instance, at the previous eco-design requirements, that has actually been very successful in driving down emissions of appliances and products. So to which extent do we strike the balance here? Because we need the guidelines and we need the certainty. But then it seems that we have like all these different patchworks of legislation. So how do we bridge that in practice?
That's another element of complexity that you add, and you rightly do, because we want to achieve the goals of the Green Deal. So on the one side, we have, I would say, in a horizontal measure, we have to bridge between hygiene rules and packaging, consumer and business reflections about the product. And at the same time, we have another, let's say, vertical dimension of Green Deal requirements. I always thought that the easiest way to achieve the Green Deal requirements would be by putting a price on CO2 emissions on everything like that. It's for the company with a very strong financial incentive to reduce CO2 emissions, but it's a bit complicated, I admit that. But whatever we now discuss about this horizontal or vertical switch of rules, the more rules we have and the more complex the interaction is, the more big companies will make the market and the more small companies will be driven out. And that cannot be our interest, because we want to have a vibrant and broad European market. And for that point, I'm very happy for Metro to have these own brands. But I think for Europe, it's very interesting to have also a lot of own brands of small and medium-sized companies that also have the same access to the single market. And therefore, my plea would rather be leave the flexibility to the market, make general calls to respect CO2 emissions, but don't make it too complicated with too many rules.
Mm-hmm, thank you. Mr. Bresler?
Yeah, I agree on this. I would even add, we work a lot, our main suppliers are also small, medium enterprises. So that's a full value chain across the continent, which we are having, especially for our own brand products. And in the end, yes, of course, it's a different thing between a big and a smaller company. I agree on this. But still also for bigger companies, the burden is huge in some cases. And that keeps us away from doing business, which has consequence and also for the customers, because things will be simply not available or the price will be higher. And that is something, I mean, we're talking a lot now about Europe, but there's also even competition outside of Europe across the world in the end. There we also need to watch out the different perspectives with what we want to have within Europe, but also there's much more and many things. We are living in a global world. So that is something where we need to watch out that we also don't go too far in terms of legislations and barriers. And this, to find the right balance, answering to your question, is not always easy. Fully understand that. Also on his side is always then difficult to see. That's why I think it's really good that this kind of reality check, these discussions between the experts or the business, let's say, and the political discussion, that this is being done to know really what are the different consequences and implications later on in the real world. And it's not only about the business side. In the end, the most of the things, the most important people or the audience is the customer, the guest in the restaurant, the consumer. That is the different groups which we should have in mind in first place, and then the rest only in the second place.
But I have to tell you, I do that every month, not only for the campaign time, but it's nice that this time you have been following us so that we can do it together.
Sure, and talking, because Mr. Bresler just mentioned the global dimension, and I think, Mr. Schwab, you and I can agree that one of the talks of town really in Brussels and one of the hot topics has been the question around competitiveness. There is no one single event that I don't attend that this question doesn't come up, the competitiveness of European companies in a globalized world. So, and there seems to be a lot of tension between policies around environmental protection and Europe staying competitive. How do we balance that? What are your thoughts on this debate?
I think we cannot balance it. It's very easy. If there is no growth, we won't be able to pay the climate protection that we need. So we have to make sure that growth is possible again and is achieved again. And only with the wealth that we create through growth, we can finance all the measures that we have to do. Isolation of houses, reduction of CO2 emission with cars, electrical installations, all that stuff we can only manage if we have the growth that we need. And so far, we need more competitiveness to allow for this growth. And it will only go easy and it will only be possible if we cut partly regulations that make people write down reports instead of working seriously. Because that working seriously would mean going for isolations, going for new technologies, in Germany also allowing for more services in the healthcare area, for example, where we urgently need people. Also look for new cooks that can use these products, cook for the people, because we are also missing cooks in Germany. There is a plenty of sectors where we need workforce that is absorbed by regulations and obligations of notifications, and that we should balance better.
So what do you see then as the main priorities of the next EU policy mandate, or at least what would you like them to be?
Well, I mean, as a politician in the campaign, you can be very easy and very clear and very strong, but making this balance a reality, reducing this complexity of diverging interests that are there and that will remain there, it's a very complicated issue. So what we should not make, again, is so stupid calls like Green Deal. We should make to a societal deal that brings together competitiveness, the fight for social interests, the fight for good prices for consumers, the fight for competitiveness and for good businesses. And this is a complexity that you can only work through with people that take a bit of time and balance. And balance we can only achieve in the public debate if we don't go for the 100% left or for the 100% right position, but for in the middle.
Mr. Bresler, what then do you think should the next European Parliament and European Union's legislative term focus on? What would be your recommendation or your personal wish list?
Oh, there are plenty of things, but first of all, I like this healthy pragmatism, what you just mentioned. So I think that is, like to step down from that bureaucratic approach and to limit, let's say, the number of existing regulations or also new upcoming ones is maybe something I think you mentioned before, like might be sometimes a boring thing, but it's work which needs to be done. And this requires really the intention, because it's something like when you, when you cut like 100 different regulations, you will not be celebrated somewhere for each and every one of it, but it's important. On the ground of the business, that's really, really important. I would welcome, I said that already before, this stronger dialogue, which we're also having today, to see also what kind of implications are there. And then anytime when something, we think in Europe that something should be done, that we have, and that is our biggest wish in the end, to have a harmonized approach, because that is, I would say, even more a struggle for us than the regulation itself sometimes. So that would be let's say the main ones, certain smaller ones related to that. that would ease, let's say, our pain a lot, would allow business growing not only for us, any kind of company operating in the retail or wholesale market. And that is something also looking to Europe, I believe would be a huge benefit, or is already a huge benefit. It's about protecting it, shaping it, fine-tuning it, and then maybe we reach altogether the next level. And that is something, yeah, we should be proud about in Europe. And also then I have no doubts that also in the global world we would be more competitive as such, that we destroy a bit some barriers which we might have built or are on the way to be built.
So in practice, if we look, for instance, at the upcoming European Commission, let's, of course, after the elections and see the results that come up, but there's usually some Commission colleges that are perhaps more on the regulatory heavy side and others that have been very heavily on the investment side. I get the feeling that the von der Leyen Commission wanted to be a very regulatory oriented, but then also because of COVID and the effects of Russia's war on Ukraine had to unlock a lot of investments from Next Generation EU. Where do you think that the next Commission will stand in this debate?
I mean, we expect as a parliamentary group that the next Commission puts more weight on making business possible, on allowing for wealth creation. But for sure, for a green, for environmental, fairly and friendly wealth creation, but that we really come back to growth. Because some political colleagues believe that growth is bad, but without growth, we won't be able to manage to invest into challenges ahead, especially in the area of the environment. And if you take, for example, artificial intelligence, you will discover a market like here. With artificial intelligence, you can create growth without any damage. You can make better deal, more value creation without any damage to the environment, to the society, to anyone. So if we use this power, for example, it's only one example of artificial intelligence, we can get richer as a society, as European Union, and invest the richness that we create into good projects. And this track we have to find back, and not so much to look on obligations of reporting every little needle that has been lost in the market.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Mr. Bresler, any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, as I already said at the beginning, so the EU single market is in the end a gift for all of us, not only from a business perspective. I think we all enjoy the freedom of traveling, the freedom of goods. So we have something built up. That's something we all need to polish on a daily basis. You are doing that even more on a daily basis than we do. And yeah, that is something we need to fight for. And the wealth, what you just mentioned, or the competitiveness globally, is something where we should watch out that we do not put barriers in front of ourselves. We need to allow that free flow of goods. We need to have, if possible, harmonized regulation. And then if we clean, let's say, in front of our own house as good as we can, the rest will be also maybe potentially easier.
So thank you very much, Mr. Andreas Schwab and Mr. Jens Bresler, for having joined us in this Euractiv Thought Leadership interview. I take many interesting conclusions from this interview, but I think the message that really strikes is the importance of preserving and maintaining the European single market as an important cornerstone, not only for large businesses like Metro, who is hosting us today in one of their stores here in Gundelfingen, but also for small and medium enterprises and also for consumers. Thank you very much for tuning in to this Euractiv Thought Leadership interview.